Just 1 second while I start the YouTube stream. Okay, and I'm starting now.
Hello, I'm Dr. Fred Johnson, the pastor for the First Genesis Baptist Church in the city of Rochester, New York. We're grateful that you're joining us today for a very important dialogue, conversation, and exchange of ideas relative to this idea of community and police relations. We're here with a group of distinguished leaders and participants from the city of Rochester to dialogue about an important topic that is critical even over the past few years, but even over the past weeks and months, significantly critical for the city of Rochester. I'm going to open up with prayer and then share with you our direction for this evening, for this day. Father, we just thank you for this time together. We pray for a conversation, a dialogue, an exchange, and a respect of those, oh God, who serve and who give of themselves for this community and for this city. We bless you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to tell you the First Genesis Baptist Church has been in existence for 47 years. Here in the great city of Rochester, we've been part of this community, the Crescent area of Hudson Avenue, intricately involved in many aspects of social justice ministry and in economic empowerment. As we have gone through this year of 2021, there's been many conversations and activities that have taken place over the past couple of years. And we have many organizations throughout the city of Rochester who are working on this important topic. We have UCLM with Reverend Lewis Stewart. We have the Baptist Ministers Alliance. We have the Faith Leaders Roundtable that is addressing these topics. Pastors on Point, pastors who are concerned about the relationship between police and the community in the city of Rochester. And then we have other organic groups, Rock the Peace, Rise Up Rochester, and many other organizations that have who are stakeholders, if you will, on this topic. So we're not here to say that we're starting a topic that has never been discussed, but rather we're trying to contribute to the furtherance of the discussion and dialogue. And so we're so grateful as the First Genesis Baptist Church who is sponsoring this specific gathering. Thank you for joining us. And we want to tell you, this is the beginning of a dialogue and discussion. This is not the only gathering, but there will be other gatherings of the second or third week in July, inviting others to contribute to this community conversation. So welcome. And we are hoping that this will result in a transformation of the relations between the police and the community. I want to now introduce the moderator for the panel of discussion today. It is Virgil Parker. Virgil is the moderator for this event over the next hour or so. He is a graduate of Howard University, majoring in journalism and minoring in African American studies. He's a proud resident of the city of Rochester and has committed his life to supporting the underserved population in the city of Rochester. He is also a faithful member of the First Genesis Baptist Church, and most importantly, we're hugely proud of his accomplishment. He's been recently chosen as a U.S. Fulbright Scholar for the year 2021-2022 academic year. And so he is prepared, well qualified, has the intellectual insight and the professionalism to allow us to coordinate us, to facilitate us through this conversation. So I want to invite Virgil Parker, moderator for this event, to come forth. Thank you, Virgil.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Johnson, and good morning, everyone. As Pastor Johnson said, My name is Virgil Parker, and I'm a proud Rochester, New York native, and I'm also a graduate of Howard University. A couple of months ago, I approached Pastor Johnson and Director Sandra Simon from the mayor's office and talked to them about the need for us to have a conversation around policing. During my time in Howard University, I have to tell you, it was very challenging for me as a young man, particularly as a young man of color, to see all the challenges that were coming out of my city concerning interactions with police officers, right? We're talking about the situation, as you all are familiar with Daniel Prude, the 9-year-old Black girl who we saw pepper sprayed and forcibly placed in the back of a police car, and other forms of misconduct. And it's very troubling. And we look at this national crisis of how relationships with police officers are not as positive, and that negativity disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. So I was honored to approach my pastor and also Director Simon and the mayor's team as two of my leaders, talking about how can we bring our community together to have this dialogue, and I'm happy we're here to do that. So as Pastor Johnson said, we have a great panel of leaders today between the mayor, several city council persons, Ms. Shani Wilson, and also the chief. But before we get to the panel itself, I wanted to highlight a particular organization within the Rochester community that is focusing on police accountability and reform, and that is the Rochester Police Accountability Board. We're honored to have the presence of Chairwoman Shani Wilson with us today. I also want to mention, before I introduce Ms. Wilson, that Director Sandra Simon is going to help us monitor the chat and Q&A box for the event today. So throughout the program, please feel free to add comments and add questions into the box, and we will try our best to acknowledge you. And also note that this event is being live streamed on Facebook. So we thank you all who are in attendance today, and we're happy to have this discussion. Let me go ahead and introduce Ms. Shani Wilson. Ms. Wilson is an internal medicine certified physician assistant with expertise in areas such as LGBTQ+ health, sexual health, minority health disparities, and vaccine preventable diseases. She is a proud community activist who engages the community. That is her core passion. She is also passionate of giving a voice to the underserved individuals in Rochester. And that said, as I said, she has the incredible position of being chairwoman of the Rochester Police Accountability Board, which is one of the first institutions of its kind. Ms. Wilson, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me. I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over the cold that's been going around Rochester, so I apologize.
Yeah, thank you. And before I ask the question, a point of verification, you can put questions in the chat box. We don't have a Q&A box, so I apologize about that. Thank you, Director Simon, for informing me about that. But Ms. Wilson, so for the first question is, can you tell us about what is the Rochester Police Accountability Board, and why should Rochester residents be aware of it?
Yeah, so I would say, in 2019, Rochesterians overwhelmingly voted to create the Police Accountability Board, a new agency within city government just dedicated solely to holding police accountable. The PAB is tasked with creating a better, fairer system for holding individual officers accountable for their actions. While the PAB's ability to create consequences for officers who commit wrongdoing is on hold thanks to the lawsuit by the local police union, the PAB still remains to be a powerful tool for Rochesterians to reimagine public safety. The city charter requires the PAB to independently investigate complaints of officer misconduct, make every aspect of policing in Rochester transparent, craft new policies and rules to fundamentally change public safety here in Rochester, and make sure that city officials are accountable for change as well, and create spaces for the community to be heard. We were overwhelmingly voted on. We are centering community in everything that we do. That, I think, is what makes us so different, because we are asking the community to have a big stake in how we can reimagine public safety.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this. I wanted to talk to you actually about that court ruling, which was recent. The courts ruled that actually the Accountability Board will not have the authority to discipline police officers, and that was one of the hopes of the organization. Talk to us about how that impacts your work, please.
Yep. So, we are currently lacking the power to discipline officers. We're still working with, lawyers, thanks to a city council, and thanks to, we're still going to go ahead and move forward. We're developing procedural rules that we can start accepting complaints with specific incidences of officer misconduct. But, I want to make something very clear. Just because we don't have the power to discipline officers right now does not mean that we cannot do what else we're charged with, which is examining policy, procedures, and practices of the Rochester Police Department. We see that, that there are definite ways that we can change how does policy affect what officers are doing on a daily basis. In the instance of the 9-year-old child that was pepper sprayed, when we want to examine, we want to scrutinize and make sure that the changes that are happening are transparent to the community. What other things are happening in the community that we can examine through policy. There, the woman and the 3-year-old child that were pepper sprayed, off of Goodman. Are there ways that we can examine policy to make sure that we can make sure that folks are safe by just changing how or examining how officers are doing their job, and then changing it based on what the community is looking for.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Also want to mention to the audience, we are streaming live on YouTube, the YouTube page for the City of Rochester, so please feel free to tune in there. There was a recent, I believe, budget approval of $5 million for the Rochester Police Accountability Board. Can you tell us, Ms. Wilson, how do you intend to use those funds to work on some current initiatives and for the organization?
So one of the things I think we're going to be, so the vision really is to help enact a broader vision for a better, safer Rochester. We would not exist if there was not a need for us. And I think that means that we are going to, have a community control system of public safety. So what really that means is that our work is laid in 5 different divisions. And we have an investigations division, which holds sworn officers of the Rochester Rochester Police Department, accountable through independent investigations into potential wrongdoing. We have an oversight and policy division, which oversees Rochester policing system as a whole and creates policies and proposals to keep Rochesterians safer with the input of the community. A legal affairs divisions to make sure that when we start hearing cases that our work is legal and ethical. A public affairs divisions to ensure that community is educated about our public safety system and it is engaged in all parts of the PAB's work. And we have an operations division that ensures that the board operates accessibly, functionally, and transparently. So we're going to be using that $5 million to start to build this agency. And we have a lot of work to do. That means that you can see all of the division responsible that we're going to be responsible for. There's 700 officers that are part of the Rochester Police Department. And we are not, of course, not after anyone, but we are going to build an accountability system that is capable of holding everyone accountable.
So thank you, Ms. Wilson. And to the last question, and it's two-pronged, is one, how can the community, our residents, support the work of the Rochester Police Accountability Board to ensure that you are successful, and how can they contact either you or the Accountability Board to offer that support?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think that the way that the community can help is just by simply, giving their feedback. There are, for instance, the Police Accountability Board Alliance and myself and another person has been every Saturday for the last month and a half at the market every Saturday, talking to ordinary, just people, Rochesterians going to the public market to buy their food. And we ask them, 2 questions. What would you like your public safety system to look like? And if you could change one thing about how you're policed, what would that be? And sometimes people have a lot to say, and sometimes people don't know what to say because they do not believe that they have a say in how they're policed. And so really, we just want to know what they think. And when we have our public affairs division, we'll be going and having a systematic approaches in how to reach out to community. But I think that the thing that they can do right now to support us is just, telling us what you want. And that's, pab.gov. We have a website, and we also have a phone number, which I can supply at the end of this talk, and our email as well. But there will be a real heavy emphasis on making sure that we're gathering community so that they're at the center of all these conversations, so that we really are getting a really good picture of what they want and how they want to be policed and how they would like their voices to be heard.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you for letting us know what you're doing at the Rochester Police Accountability Board. And please, as Director Simon just mentioned, please feel free to put your information in the chat box for the organization to contact, for individuals to contact the organization. Thank you. So the next part of our program, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, we are going to introduce the panelists. Like I said, we have a rockstar panel with Mayor Councilman Lightfoot, Councilwoman Scott, and the chief. I'm going to go through, I'm going to introduce each one of the panelists, and then we're going to go back around and ask questions. So first up for introduction is Mayor Lovely Warren. Mayor Warren has served as mayor of the city of Rochester since January 1st, 2014. When she was elected, she was the first female mayor in Rochester's history, and she was also one of the youngest mayors in modern times. She also served on the Rochester City Council from 2007 to 2013. Her administrative agenda is focused on job creation, fostering safer and more vibrant neighborhoods, improving educational opportunities for Rochester residents. And she's also an active member of the National League of Cities. And she uses her membership to be on the task force for housing, the Council on Youth, Education, and Families, and the Race, Equity, and Leadership Initiative. Mayor Warren, thank you so much for being with us today. Next, we have Chief Harriet Sullivan. Chief Cynthia Harriet Sullivan, excuse me. The chief currently serves as the interim chief of police here in Rochester, New York. She is a criminal justice process improvement professional with years of experience in the field of criminal justice and organizational problem solving. She served as the chair of the Unite Rochester Justice Engagement, which examines the issue of racial disparity in the criminal justice process and develops solutions. She managed the development of the first Community Court Academy and also the Community Justice Forum, both with the intended goal of addressing disparity in the criminal justice system, and also developed the Community Response Team, which works with the community to respond to issues of community unrest. And we're very happy to have the chief. Thank you for being with us today, Chief. Next, we have Councilwoman Loretta Scott. Councilwoman Scott was first elected to Rochester City's Council in 2009. And then she was then chosen by her peers to serve as president of the city council in the year 2012. Councilwoman Scott has focused her work around creating and sustaining jobs, eliminating poverty, and also reforming the police accountability process. Councilwoman Scott has extensive experience in the public, non-for-profit, and private sectors. She served the city of Rochester for 30 years and was the first African-American female to serve as the department head when she was the city of Rochester commissioner on Department of Parks, Recreation, and Human Services. And we are honored to have President Loretta Scott with us today. Thank you, Madam Councilwoman. And last and certainly not least, we have Councilman Willie Lightfoot. Councilman Lightfoot is a Rochester, New York native who served as a firefighter here in the city of Rochester. He is also a veteran of the United States Air Force, and he was also a recent Monroe County legislator. Councilman Lightfoot serves as the vice president of Rochester City Council and is the head chair of Rochester Public Safety Committee. Councilman Lightfoot is the commissioner of the Rochester and Monroe County Racial and Structural Equity Commission and leads the business development in that space. He's also a pastor and the founder of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, which we will hopefully discuss later. Councilman Lightfoot, thank you so much for being with us today, sir. So now to the first question. And this first question is going to go to Mayor Lovely Warren. Mayor Warren, what are your thoughts about the controversial actions from police officers in our community in recent months, and what solutions have you been working on to fix it?
So when we think about the controversial actions, of course, it breaks your heart, you know, when you see people being brutalized or treated unfairly in your community. I believe that most of our police officers are doing an exceptional job under extenuating circumstances. However, we have to hold those people that are acting outside of our bounds and outside of our policies and procedures accountable. And that is the reason why I think that, you know, it was important to support and provide the funding for the Police Accountability Board to do the work that they were set out to do. You know, when our citizens, you know, voted for the Police Accountability Board, they wanted an independent body to hear their cases and to really work hard to ensure that officers that acted outside policies and procedures will be held accountable. You know, I'll be the first to support those that are doing the right thing, but I'm going to be the first to also hold those accountable that are not. And so, you know, when we talk about what we're doing, we have initiated a number of different and new policies and procedures with Chief Harriet Sullivan. She has started also different trainings for our officers. Just last month, we had Eric Holder participate in one of those trainings, really that dealt with racial bias and also other policies and procedures that were challenged. We are in the process of working with a national firm, WilmerHale, to really examine our policies and procedure and give us recommendations on what we need to change and how we need to do things differently. We also worked with the community to bring forth Executive Order 203, which is a mandate by Governor Cuomo that basically sets in stone and gets us on a path where we start to look at how we're policing our community and the changes that we can make. Some of those recommendations is around transparency and providing different data and information. Others is about officer wellness and community wellness. And a large portion of it really is about how we do business in our community. One of the reasons why we wanted and I advocated and brought body-worn camera video here was so that our community and we could see what was happening in neighborhoods and how people were being dealt with. And I'm thankful that we have body-worn camera videos, but we also know that the redaction process is very challenging. And so we're upgrading that process right now. We also understand that people that have mental health challenges or substance abuse challenges have been traditionally treated as if they were criminals when their actions are not that of a criminal nature or from a criminal mindset. They actually need help, and we needed to bring a new humane treatment to our residents. And so that's the reason why we started the Person in Crisis team. And the budget that we just passed actually increases that team, increases that response to people that have mental health and substance abuse. So I can go on and on about the new initiatives that we're starting, but I definitely want to make it very, very clear that it has to be a partnership, with the community working hand in hand with the police department and the police department working hand in hand with the community. I believe that our intern police chief, Harriet Sullivan, has been really in tune with that and building those relationships and the knowledge that she has as it pertains to having been a community advocate, having worked for not-for-profits, and also having come up through the ranks of the Rochester Police Department. She has a unique perspective that she's been bringing to the ground. And I think that it has definitely been one of the things that has been highlighted as a positive, because we definitely understand that it has to be a mindset change and it has to be a heart change on both sides.
Thank you for that, Mayor. And actually going to the chief, that's a great point to bring up. Chief Harriet Sullivan, since you assumed leadership in the police department, can you tell us from your experience, why do you believe that the relationship between police officers and the Black-brown community is so poor? And to the mayor's point, can you tell us about some of the strategies that you're working on to improve that relationship?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me today. It was great to meet you. I look forward to the discussion. Let me say first that all relationships, require care and attention, and it's an ongoing process. You can't not speak with each other or meet regularly to talk about what issues are and then wonder why there's a problem or concern. I do think communication is key, like I said, for all relationships. And also what's important, as far as I'm concerned, is legitimacy. And that is that any relationship where on one part there is oversight involved, whether it's the police or other venues, you have to build a relationship still. You don't get a pass on that, because if you're not seen as legitimate or fair or unbiased in your process, then you're going to have issues. And that's something I'm always stressing. It's really important to bring that to the table. Strategies, I know you asked me about. We've tried to certainly hit the ground running with this. We've already released some policies. Some of you have heard in the news, you see certain issues come up, and you may even have heard the term lawful but awful, or is it awful but lawful? But at the end of the day, you have to really do an examination and really get to the core of what the issues are. And sometimes it's not enough even to punish you where it's warranted. You have to look at causations. What are the internal factors? The mayor talked a minute ago about changing hearts and minds in certain ways, and I think those things are also important. But I also want to stress that we're going to continue to work together with the community to make the changes that are needed and necessary. It's not an option to do any less than that. I just want to stress that we can come up with the best policies, the best processes, but if at the end of the day, the key people are not in a room talking to each other and working through concerns together, or both sides are comfortable coming forward and saying, I have an issue with this certain incident or area, how can we work through it? If those things don't happen, then you're not going to see substantive change anyway. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chief. And again, thank you and to the mayor for being here with us today. Councilwoman Scott, the next question is to you. You have one of the longest stints of service on this panel here in the city of Rochester. Can you talk to us about what your public service has taught you about the issues with policing in our community, please?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. What my public service has taught me, and I'm not even sure it's my public service, it's just my life journey has taught me that blue outweighs black. And regardless of what we've done over the years with public service, with police in particular, the culture is so embedded that it almost doesn't matter how many people of color we even get under force, because what we see is the same kinds of attitudes and behaviors being displayed by the people of color who join those ranks. I'm not without hope, though, for being able to address that. I'm just realistic about the prospects. What the mayor said about the change of heart and the chief said about relationships, it all factors into that, because I have come to be convinced that unless and until we can have our public safety officers acknowledge, accept, respect that we people of color are human, accept our humanity, we will not be able to make the kind of progress we need to make. I believe that some of the incidents that we've described that were so horrendous would not have occurred if there had been that kind of acknowledgement. This is a child, or this is a mother, this is a baby. In the absence of that appreciation and respect for our humanity, I don't believe that we will make the progress. But as I said, I'm not without hope. Things just seem to keep repeating themselves. What is not repeating is the level of attention that we at the government level are now applying. And I'm very, very proud of that. So I think we're on the right path.
Thank you, Councilwoman Scott. Councilman Lightfoot, I want to particularly leverage your perspective as a Black male when I ask you this question. How do you think the institutional racism in the policing system is disproportionately impacting Black and brown males? Councilman Lightfoot, please.
First and foremost, I want to say good morning to each and every one of you. Peace and blessings to Director Simon, to you, Mr. Parker, our moderator, to Madam Mayor, to Mr. President Scott, Pastor Johnson, Ms. Wilson, and of course, Chief Sullivan, and to the citizens and our viewers and listeners. I bid you peace and blessings to each and every one of you and your families. That is a very good question. And again, I want to thank Pastor Johnson again for hosting and such an important community conversation. And I hope we continue these conversations. I'm glad to hear that some of these conversations will keep continuing within our community. That's a very good question that you asked me, Mr. Parker. And I would say When you look at how this institutional, and I would like to add the word structural, because you have to, I think they both go hand in hand, institutional and structural racism in our policing system disproportionately affect especially men of color, Black and brown men. You have to look at policing and the history of policing. And when you look at that, you have to see the two historical narratives about the origin of American law enforcement. When you're looking at that, you have to look at Southern slaveholding states that had roots in slave patrols and squadrons made up of white volunteers empowered to use vigilante tactics to enforce laws related to slavery. They located and returned enslaved people who had escaped crushed uprisings led by enslaved people and punished enslaved workers for found or believed to have violated plantation rules. And then we know Jim Crow laws as a result came as a result of that and enforced by law enforcement as well too. So in order to look at the impact of institutional and structural racism of Black and brown men, as was said in regards to President Scott's statement about being looked at as humane, when you look at the history of this, when individuals, Black and brown people, weren't even looked at or were treated less than even as animals, then that right there is a culture. So when you have a culture and a systemic and structural embedded into law enforcement, going back to how Black and brown people were even viewed as less than humane, then that culture is what we're dealing with and seeing transcending over generations and into what we're seeing playing out on Instagram, Facebook, body-worn cameras, and et cetera, is the fact that not all officers, of course, but there has been a culture of individuals, and we've seen it in the insurrection on the White House. We've seen that many of these officers some of them were involved in racist types of organizations, et cetera. And so that leads back to the historic narrative and factual information of the culture around racism and structural institutional racism that was embedded, goes all the way back to slavery. And the impact on that is what we see of our jails being full, our funeral homes and cemeteries being full of Black and brown people that have been impacted disproportionately as a result of that negative culture embedded into policing.
Thank you, Councilman. At the first round of questions, I want to thank all the panelists again for being here, because this was definitely a necessary conversation, and I'm glad that we're having it. The next question is going to go back to you, Mayor Warren. You've heard of movements and policy recommendations like defund the police. I want to know, what are your thoughts around that policy recommendation of taking money from the Rochester Police Department? And is that a form of policy that you're willing to recommend in your administration, please?
So we have two different perspectives on what we mean by reallocating resources. Our police department had been focused on really doing a lot that was outside of protecting and serving. And so when we talk about the person in crisis team, in treating people that have a mental health or substance abuse crisis differently, it has to be done with a team that has the expertise of doing so. And so that is the reason why, we have employed social workers and counselors and outreach people to do that. And so we took a really hard look, this past year at what is our police department doing that's outside of really protecting and serving. Because we have another community, a part of our community that have been asking for more resources, more police officers in neighborhoods and all of that. And so you have to bring that balance. We also know that across the country, we have a rash of violence that's happening. And when I say a rash of violence, just in Rochester this past week, we had 3 people that have been murdered. And we want to send our condolences to their families and families across our community. And so we need we want a police department that is fulfilling the goal and the requirement from the taxpayers of the city of Rochester, and that is really to protect and serve. And we have to give them the resources in order to do exactly that, to protect and serve, one that protects and serves with humanity, with humility, with compassion, and understanding of the population that they're serving. and you have to support them with the resources that they need to effectively do that job. So that's what we've been looking at, taking those requirements from the police department that are outside of that work of delivering those services to the community, and we will continue to do that. We are going to look at, our police department as a whole. Is it the right size? Are we doing the right thing? And that also has to do with doing it in a way that does not disrupt the system, and doing it with a plan. And, for me, we have always looked at, as a city of Rochester, managed ourselves fiscally in unique ways, and been able to deliver for our taxpayers and help them understand where their taxpayer dollars are going. And we want to make sure that as we sort of transition our police department to those roles of really focusing on protecting and serving, that we do so in a way that allows them to continue to do the job for the citizens of Rochester, continue to protect and serve in a way that respects the taxpayers and the service that they're providing on the ground, but also gives them the resources to be able to carry out the job that we are requiring for them to do.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for that. I also want to take a moment to, again, encourage people to submit questions as necessary, and we're going to do our best to address them. Chief, this next question is going to you. There's been a big complaint from the community about the use of deadly force, the overuse of deadly force by the hands of police officers. Has the policy on deadly force from the Rochester Police Department changed since you've retired, and how does it need to continue to be modified? Please, Chief.
Thank you. I believe that we know a lot more now, that medicine and science has given us more information. So, for example, many of you are probably familiar with the deinstitutionalization process, where the intent, I believe, was well intended, but when the rules were changed about people under behavioral health services, it resulted in quite a number of people being out in the community, generally poor people who living in poverty, who had limited options on getting service. So, but at the time, did we have a game plan for understanding that a lot of those people would be put out in the community and not have access to resources? And I think that piece has sort of driven us to a point where majority of these incidences we've been dealing with, from what I've seen, not just in our community, but I talk with a lot of other police chiefs. I'm a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, have been for years. And so we have these conversations because we see our role as being people of color, but also involved in law enforcement, sort of at the nexus of this process. So it's I've been focusing on what changes do we need to make to get us to a point, as not just as a police department, but as a community, where people are safe or safer, and that we're having dialogue about what changes need to happen in order to address problems like violence. The mayor mentioned about the spate of violence we're seeing, not just in Rochester, but around the country. So as police chief, I have to keep a balance between having effective policies that are as fair as we can make them, but also the community people who are going around just living their lives, that they're not unfairly burdened on it. What I've said to our folks is that they've got a charge to get out there and get the gun violent offenders out of the community, the ones that are terrorizing those everyday citizens, but at the same time, people who are just living their lives, that they're left out of it as much as possible. So that's my focus and goal, is we've got to address the people that commit violence so that the community at large feels safer, of all races, And then we also have to address that activity without focusing on policies that just blanket a whole community. And no matter what you're doing, you're kind of brought in under that umbrella. So that's something we've been working to avoid. But less so, my focus is on what we know now and the policies that we've been putting out and developing that will provide as much safety as we can to the community on different ways, but also obviously the personnel, because they have to be safe as well in order to do their jobs. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chief. Councilwoman Scott, there is a huge complaint about over policing in the city of Rochester. It's come from civilians. I believe it's also come from leaders. What are the city council's thoughts on reducing the size of the city's police force, one, and also investing in an alternative crisis intervention team, please?
Recently, the conversation between about investing in crisis intervention services and reducing the size of police budgets have been totally linked and interdependent. And I don't see them as that. I believe both of those things need to occur, but one is not dependent upon the other one happening. Now, the reason I say that is we need to provide additional crisis intervention services. And it appears that the reason we need to is because we got all the money in the police department. We just push it over to the service. That's not the case. We as a city are being asked and required to provide services that we should not. What the chief said about the people who've been released from institutions and now are on the streets and whose behaviors are being caught up in the whole policing network, that should not be. That came from the state and the county. So, every time this conversation comes up, I'll put that back on the table. At some point, we've got to look back at the places that are supposed to be funding this and what the impact is from deinstitutionalization of mental health patients has been on the community at large. So that's sort of a thing sitting right in the middle. We do need to address that. And having said that, I do believe the police budget needs to be reduced, not because I know what size the department should be. We want to find that out, and we'll do that by some in-depth analysis and getting the support of someone or some agency or somebody to help us look at that and develop a plan to get that. But because I know that it needs to be reduced simply by virtue of the fact that it's become bloated over the years. They've not had the requirement to reduce their budget the way other city departments have. Having run a city department for many years, I know that the police department never had to achieve what we call a BLA, a budget level allocation, where you're supposedly starting at almost like a zero point and going forward to what you need. They never had to do that. They just kept what they had and added a little more. That equals bloat. So I think we do need to look at that and to bring it into a more reasonable level once we determine what reasonable levels are.
Yeah. And as a quick follow-up to you again, Councilwoman Scott, thank you for your response. Do you think that this idea of reducing the police budget, investing in an alternative crisis response team, will that reduce conflict in the city between police officers and Black and brown communities? Do you think that can assist with alleviating the conflict?
Certainly, that along with the other measures that have been discussed as far as training officers on how to engage and interact with people who have mental health issues, who are not criminals, they're just sick. So I believe that would help, certainly.
Thank you, Councilman Scott. Councilman Lightfoot, going back to you, there's been talks about this new legislation called Daniel's Law, obviously named in honor of Daniel Prude. Can you tell us about what Daniel's Law is and how that legislation will change encounters between police officers in the community?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll do my best. I'm not the sponsor of this particular legislation. This legislation is also not a city proposed legislation. It is a state proposed legislation, but I'll do my best to provide some clarity to it. It was sponsored by Senator Samara Brock, Senator District 55, and shout out to her and Assemblyman Harry Bronson from Assembly District 138. And Assembly Samara Brock is the chair of the Senate Committee of Mental Health. She introduced Daniels Law as a comprehensive piece of legislation that outlines how New Yorkers experiencing a mental health breakdown and/or substance abuse crisis can better be served by a public health response that maximizes consent-based care and minimizes the role of law enforcement and the use of force against an individual. The Daniels Law would empower the New York State Department of Health to create a new statewide mental health response council and local mental health response units. These new mental health response units would offer a more comprehensive and secure way to answer the mental health and substance abuse crisis in our communities with safety, care, and compassion. The legislation is named, of course, as you mentioned, after Daniel Pruitt, a Black man who encountered with police in Rochester while he was experiencing a mental health crisis, which resulted in his death. The purpose of this legislation is to promote the public health safety and welfare of all citizens by broadly ensuring a public health-based response to anyone in New York experiencing a mental health or substance abuse crisis, to offer and assure the most appropriate response to treatment of and transport of individuals experiencing crisis due to mental health conditions or substance abuse, and finally, to de-escalate crisis situations so that a few New Yorkers as possible experiencing non-consensual transport, use of force, or criminal consensus as a result of mental health or substance abuse crisis. So more information, of course, can be found at the New York State Senate US website, but this is a bill that is sponsored by two of our local state delegate officials.
Thank you. No, thank you, Councilman. We have two questions for the audience that Director Simon is going to help us direct. Before I mention that, I noticed that one of our audience members tried to use the raise hand function. I want to reiterate, it'd be easiest if you place your question in the chat box, and then we will try to get to your question as easy as possible. But Director Simon, please, so you have two questions for us.
Okay, the first question is to both the mayor as well as to the chief and city council president, Loretta Scott, and vice council president, Willie Lightfoot. How will you recruit more Black and brown men and women to become police officers, as well as firefighters and mental health or crisis intervention personnel?
Let's go ahead and go in that order. Mayor, would you like to answer that question first?
When it comes down to mental health personnel, I think that, you know, our person in crisis team has been the team that has been on the ground. I want to commend our Commissioner of Recreation and Human Services, Dr. Daniel Lyman Torres, because in a matter of months, she brought this team, you know, she started basically from scratch. I know that on this past week, you know, Council President Scott made a note that, you know, the city of Rochester, we don't have the tax base to really continue to bring mental health to the forefront. These dollars come to the County of Monroe, and we've stepped into this space because we see there's this gap there. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the support to our residents that need it, and we're doing it in an effective and efficient way. And that's why in this budget we increased our person in crisis team to now 40. And we'll see how we can continue to support the mental health professionals in our community. I want to take this question as well, because I know that there is this question about police residency that was also in the chat that I'll answer, and then I'll turn it over to the chief. Right now, based on state law, the city of Rochester cannot require that police officers or firefighters live in the city of Rochester. And so, you know, we have asked our state legislators to introduce legislation to require that newly hired officers live in the city. I believe that that legislation has been introduced, but it has not been passed yet. Similar situated, Buffalo and Syracuse has that same legislation, but that is a requirement that we cannot require at a local level. It has to be done at a state level.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Harriet Sullivan, do you want to take a moment to address the question that was directed by Director Simon?
Sure. On the issue of recruitment, it's always been a little challenge because we have stringent requirements. You have that exam, and then there are different parts that have to be tested under civil service rules. So, and then we are also under a consent decree that we have to take into consideration when doing hiring. The other unfortunate downside of the recent focus on policing, whether some areas of that are true or not, has been that the retirements and resignations have really risen to a high level, and so my obvious concern is that we get on top of this now and not wait until or if there's an issue with us getting enough staffing on board. So having said that, I think that and there are a couple of reasons for this. It's something I've seen over the years since I've been involved in law enforcement, that there are a couple of reasons for the importance of having people of color in the profession. One is that while it is important for people to see people that look like them, there's something about being able to reach out to someone that you maybe feel a little more comfortable with. Other officers may not necessarily appreciate that, but I've gone to enough incidences where there's been a conflict. And it's not that maybe if it's a white officer on scene, it's not that they're not telling that person the correct information, but there's a trust level on the other side. And so I may come in and I may explain those same things, but they'll be more likely to accept it from me. And that is one of the major advantages and benefits I see. The other is sometimes understanding cultural differences. It's important to have someone there that can speak to that. It often goes a long way in resolving conflicts, misunderstandings, and I have not yet seen a substitute for that. While police are sort of at the nexus for the criminal justice process, but I just want to reiterate to everyone that lengthy disparities throughout the process cannot take place unless different parts of the system are complicit in that. And so while we have to take a look at that, like I said, that law enforcement is at the nexus, but there are different steps in the justice process. And you're hearing it from someone who spent years looking at this and working with teams around the country to really look and do a deep dive at what their disparity issues are. And I'll end by saying this past exam announcement we had 500 people sign up to take the test. That's a record low. And so what I do like, what I believe in this mayor and in the council president and vice president is their focus and goal is on the community's well-being. And I've seen that enough over the years. I don't question that. So I think if we can come at this in a way that's going to save the city some aggravation down the road, then we have the people in place that are going to be able to help us do that. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Chief. I want to give the council persons an opportunity, Councilwoman Scott or Councilwoman Lightfoot, Councilman, Lightfoot, to address recruiting Black police officers for the police department. Either one of you have a comment about that?
I would simply add that we have a program called Pathways to Careers in Public Safety, which deals with high school students to introduce them. It started initially trying to get people of color into the fire department, into the fire force, because there were virtually none, or very few. The vice president was there and couple other people, but there was, the number was very, very low. So we, the city school district, AMR, and a handful of others developed this program to introduce high school students to this occupation. A lot of great young people have come through that. Now, I don't know, I've not heard how many of them have gone to policing, but a number of them are on the fire department. And I still think that's one of the routes that we can get people onto the force. They have to be introduced to it as an option at an early age and guided through the process, because it can be cumbersome, like any civil service process. But I certainly support that program and would encourage others to participate.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Scott, before you, or Councilman Life, before you make a comment, I wanted just to clarify that this is addressing Black and brown police officers, not just Black. But Councilman Life, do you have a comment about recruiting Black and brown police officers to the department and how that could benefit our community?
Yes, sir. I would agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues. I think it has to be early exposure is part of it. Positive police contact and changing the narrative around police and community relations, of course. That's an ongoing, we're doing that even as we speak. And I think ultimately, in order to see the structural and institutional things that we talked about before change, you're gonna have to see and have people of color, Black and brown individuals that are working within department and living within the community that which they serve, which I believe brings a greater opportunity for cultural sensitivity and the ability to be able to address those who look like you that are serving you. So I think it's the benefits of it. And I think we have to continue and go back to doing some of the things that Madam Mayor and Madam President have done over the years, working with individuals such as Pastor Johnson and other church and clergy and community leaders to do recruitment. It's been very successful in the fire department. It's proven successes. And we have to go back to doing some of those things that we were doing before the pandemic around recruitment that I think that have shown successes in the past, and just it has to be a strategic approach that's multifaceted to really target the Black and brown community.
Thank you, Councilman. Director Simon, I believe you had a second question for the audience or for the panel.
Yes, I do. Actually, it's a statement, and I was going to wait, but I'll read it now. It says, when we had 335,000 residents in 1950, we only had 400 officers. In 2021, we had 206,000 residents, and now we have 700 plus officers. Can we attrition down the number of police officers to redirect funds to support resources for mental health, addiction, and poverty? And related to that, he says, to address the current spike in shooting incidents, can we reallocate police from lower crime areas to higher crime areas? And I believe that's directed at the chief.
Chief, would you like to address that question? Yes.
Sure. I can be brief on that. Thank you. This study that the mayor mentioned and also the council president mentioned, looking at how and in what way to maybe reduce the budget are critical, and part of it is for those exact reasons that you brought up. So, for example, we have a model here that involves the neighborhood service centers, where those people and the law enforcement, they're really focused on addressing quality of life issues. Now, whether or not looking at this assessment involves reducing those and giving the community the option to say, well, if we decrease our numbers, so looking at that 400 in and of itself is not enough. We have to do a deeper dive analysis. Out of that number, how many actually respond to calls? How many respond to quality, are designated to respond to quality of life community issues? How many are involved in case follow-up where we have major crimes or homicides? And then when you reduce that number, will it impact response times to calls for service? And do that knowing that if currently the average is 5 minutes and your reductions make it 10, those are the things that we have to look at the end of the day. And then finally, that last part, that's a tough question. If it's a major incident, often you will have police get shifted anyway, because there's just such a need there, where we have maybe a major incident. I've been out there where I've had some major incidents happen, and then the section next door will come over and help, because that's very much needed. But at the same time, you talk to community members, they want to see their police in their neighborhoods, and it's reassuring to them. And so I think before you take a big step like that, if we're talking about letting the community weigh in, I think that's got to be a serious consideration. I don't envy that job, whoever does it, but that one I know from doing my tour and talking to different groups and members of the community and nonprofits, that one is pretty clear. They want to see their officers assigned to their neighborhoods. They want to see them there.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chief. We're getting down to our last few moments, so ask a couple more questions so we can get to. This next question is going to go to you, Mayor Lovely Morning. It's an important question. You've been involved in the news about requesting the authority to be able to terminate police officers' cause. What are the necessary steps for allowing you to have that authority legally? And can you explain more as to why that authority is important for police accountability and reform, please, Mayor?
So, as with police residency, there is also this due process, and there's this process that the municipality has to go through. Not just the city of Rochester, all municipalities across the city of New York have to go through in order to terminate an officer. And that process can be drawn out for years. It can take 2, 3, 4 years, depending on how the matter is investigated. When we have hearing officers that can hear the case, and then you have to bring that matter before the hearing officer, and then you have time to appeal and all of that. And I understand that this is very frustrating to a community. And I said, well, just do it anyways, just fire them anyways, and who cares? And this is what I definitely want people to understand. If we circumvent the process that is outlined by law, and we were to fire the officer without going through the due process requirements, that officer would get their job back, and we would never be able to bring them up on those charges again. That is the process. And so the reason why we have been asking for these changes in state law is because basically municipalities are stuck in this structure, and we cannot do it on our own without a change in state law. Now, some people may say, and I know that our state representatives have said, oh, well, you can negotiate it at the negotiation table. This is not something. Now, listen, as an attorney, I can tell you that this is not something that I would have any union negotiate at the table. They could not, a municipality or any entity could not pay enough in order to get it so that the entity would be able to fire for cause. Either you believe that you want substantive change on behalf of our residents and to be able to fire for cause. Now, listen, when I say for cause, the state legislature can outline what for cause means. It doesn't have to be what I might believe. They can outline what for cause means. Either you believe that our residents deserve the ability to, and our police chief, and deserve the ability to fire when she knows that something has been so egregiously done to one of our residents, and she deserves that ability to do so, or you don't. And you can't have it both ways. This notion that you can have it both ways, oh, you can negotiate, and nobody's gonna negotiate that. That's a cop-out. It's an excuse, and so we need people that are going to do right by the community and, and give the municipality the ability to fire for cause because it's the right thing to do. Now, if you're a defendant or you're in court at any point in time during that case, you can fire your attorney, and you don't have to do it for cause. You can say, listen, you're not representing me. You don't have to do it cause. Taxpayers that are paying taxes in the city of Rochester deserve to have this ability to do this. And I think that, we have to do things differently given what we are seeing across the spectrum. Now, I'll say the things that we're seeing on video cameras and all that stuff, we heard that it was happening before, right? We heard that there was these issues that was happening across the country before. However, we were never able to have a document or a video that really showed what was going on in our communities. And I'll say again, I believe that the majority of our officers are great officers that are doing the right thing, that are here to serve the people, and they get lumped in with the very select few. It's the same thing with our citizens. 99% of our citizens are doing the right thing, and 1% is causing the problems. It's the same exact thing. And we have to be able to deal with the 1%. And we have to be able to deal with them swiftly and effectively for the betterment of our community and the relationships between the police and the community going forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I have one last question. I'm going to direct it to both of our city council persons, Councilman Light. Let's go to you first. This is regarding gun violence. Gun violence is a big issue in our community, and some people correlate gun violence to the issue of over-policing in our city. Councilman Lightfoot, as the founder of Rock Against Gun Violence Initiative, can you talk to us about how that initiative can end the need for over-policing in our city? And then afterwards, Councilwoman Scott, I'll ask you about how your perspective on gun violence and stopping gun violence and ending over-policing in our community. But Councilman Lightfoot, please go first.
Oh yeah, thank you. Gun violence in our community is a public health crisis. It is a state of emergency, in my opinion. Just a couple of days ago, I'm sitting in my barbershop and 20 gunshots go off, and I go out and I witnessed a young man laying on the side of the street, dead, murdered in the middle of the day. Children playing in the playground, people all over and around, and it's gotten to such a point. And then 2 weeks prior to then, bullets rang out into my building through both walls of the apartments and upstairs into a lady's chair. If she'd have been sitting in that chair, she would be murdered. Now, these are two different incidents. One kid in the street, another person in their home. This lady's home. Where else is she supposed to be? She's in her house, right? So I would say that Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is something that, to answer your question, but I'm very passionate about this because it's so very close to me and it's so very fresh. And I've spent 20 years on the Rochester Fire Department, 12 years in the United States Air Force, been to 2 wars, Desert Storm, Operation Enduring Freedom, but I've never felt the way I feel now. This gun violence is just it has to stop. So when I first came on, long story short, came on the city council, I came to the mayor with an idea to bring people together around gun violence that were working in that space. We had a lot of people working in that space, but they weren't collectively talking to each other and being intentional about working together as an organization, as with one voice. The mayor approved of the idea. We started to think about a campaign, A Shot from a Gun Can't Be Undone. We created a collaborative, being intentional about bringing everyone who works in the space, especially community-driven individuals. There's other organizations, and many of them are partner with us to come against education, eradication, and advocating around gun violence and creating ideas. We gave the mayor an action plan. She implemented almost, and city council, through the help of President Scott, supported the campaign, which is an educational campaign. You see many of the billboards out and around our city, even to this day, or up to date. And we saw a record low decrease in victims of homicide in 2019. And then hit the pandemic. And we saw a spike, which we're seeing. I'm part of the National League of Cities Reimagining Policing Task Force, and I'm sitting with elected officials from all over the country. Everyone is shaking their heads and grappling and trying to figure out how to solve these issues. And some of the cities that have been the least most violent are seeing violence like never before. And so the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition was a tool. It's just a tool. It's not the tool, but it's a tool. And I would submit and be very clear that we need many tools to combat such a complicated, complex issue of violence and gun violence within our community and in America. And so in order for us to do that, we have to bring our heads together. And so what the coalition is a tool to bring individuals together to be a soundboard in one voice around education, advocating around gun violence within our community. Also will be coming out very shortly with a report, a toolkit for cities from the National League of Cities Reimagining Task Force. And that's going to be another tool to help us. And I believe that individuals like or organizations like Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition that, again, that we never had before. The city was never in this space. And as a result of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, spawned the homicide response team, the persons in crisis team, the Think About It campaign, and all of these initiatives, if you will, somewhat came as inspiration as a result of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. And now we're moving into even more work through the National League of Cities. So that's pretty much in a nutshell, the work of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, which is ongoing, and it's an open table for anyone who wants to be a part of the solution. And it's not the solution, but it's just another tool that we're using that's also, and I would say this in my closing, also speaks to the creation or new creation of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. Many other cities have an Office of Violence Prevention, and we're looking at modeling after Newark, New Jersey, which has shown significant successes around reducing their violence in their community, and also inspired our new, which is spearheaded by the mayor, Office of Neighborhood Safety.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Lightfoot. We're almost right at time. We have about 1 minute left, and I want to be respectful for our panelists and to our guests. I want to thank everyone who submitted questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but thank you those who have been active. Councilwoman Scott, I want to give you the last comment respectfully because you didn't get a fair number of questions. Do you have anything you want to add to what any of your colleagues just said, particularly around gun violence and how that relates to reducing over policing? And then after that, we will close out. Yes.
Mr. Parker, before Council President Scott goes, I'm sorry, Council President Scott, but I think that it's a very important question here that was put into the chat by Susan Morehouse of what ways could our good officers be encouraged by our city and police department. And I think that the one way that we are going to be focusing on highlighting the good work of our police officers. I know that the chief and her team are looking at ways to put out videos to really highlight what they have been doing and highlighting those body-worn camera videos where they de-escalate situations and things like that. So how we put out the challenging things, we're gonna start to put out the good things because we do want people to know that we have a lot of good officers that are out here doing the right thing, de-escalating situations, and we want them to be highlighted as well. And so I'm sorry, Council President Scott, for interrupting, but I thought that was a very important question that needed to be answered.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, that's all right, Mayor. You're fine, and I'm all set.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Scott. So I'll say in my closing, I'll pass it back to Pastor Johnson. Again, thank you to everyone, to our panelists, to our guests who are in attendance. I want to sincerely thank you, Nathan Miller from the City Hall team, the communication team, for supporting this. Maisha Beard, I want to thank all administrative staff, Miss Lillian with the Rochester Police Department, Miss Carolyn Thomas from Councilwoman Scott's team, and every other person really who was instrumental with this. And thank you once again to my First Genesis Baptist family for hosting this conversation. Again, there's going to be more to continue. But thank you all so much for being with us. Pastor Johnson, would you like to close this out?
Yes, thank you so much, Virgil. Just a great panel and discussion. Thank you for moderating it. And you'll be hearing more from Virgil as the Director of Community Engagement for First Genesis. The next conversations, which will occur in the second or third week in July around this idea of police and community relations. And we'll be talking with the faith leaders within the city of Rochester and those who are part of the community. And so there is a next conversation. And I do want to also just thank Mayor Lovely Warren for joining us. Chief Harriet Sullivan, thank you so much for your perspective and insight. Council President Loretta Scott, thank you so much for your thoughts and strategies and tactics. And Council Vice President Willie Lightfoot, thank you for your diligent work in the community. And we also, last but not least, want to thank Shani Wilson, who's the chairperson for the Police Accountability Board.
Pastor,
yes.
can I, just 2 seconds, I want to give a shout out to my good friend, close friend, Sorellen Davis, a sister. She's getting sworn in as the new chief of Memphis Police Department today. So I just want to call her name out and tell her I'm praying for her. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So this conversation will go on, and the community, it is time to talk change. This is part of the conversation. As I stated earlier, there are other organizations that are doing great policy work. So this was meant to be policy, but a dialogue discussion, but some great ideas and strategies that are already in place have been shared. I want to as well let you know this will be available on our First Genesis Baptist Church Facebook page and YouTube channel, this complete video. So thank you so much. And we are looking forward to the next conversations in the second and third week of July. And we thank the city of Rochester for partnering with us. I'm going to ask our Vice President, Willie Lightfoot, to dismiss us with prayer, as if you can, Pastor.
Yes. Father, we come before you. We just want to say thank you. We thank you for this event. We thank you for each and every one of our panelists, our moderators, all of our viewers and listeners that are listening at this time, God, and that will be listening at a future time. We pray for this city, God. We pray that you would bless this city, bless all of our leaders, touch our mayor, our county executive, our president of city council, all of our legislators on all levels, God. Bless us to be as one, to be able to deal with these issues within our community. God, we pray for those who have lost loved ones to COVID-19, and we pray those who have lost loved ones to violence within our community. We ask that you lift them up, God, and we ask that you give us guidance and understanding. You said in your word, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins and I will heal their land. God, we're looking for a healing. Help us, God, to get closer to you and help us to be servant leaders for this community. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.
We will see you next time. God bless you.
God bless you all.